Afternoon. Okay, no, I've been up, I think, on, I started on East Coast time today, so I think I woke up around midnight last night to be here in time. So it's a real pleasure to be here. My name is Dan Zarrilli. I'm the Chief Climate Policy Advisor for Mayor de Blasio in the Mayor's office back in New York City. Okay, all right. A round of applause for Mayor de Blasio, please. I'm joined by a great panel here today. I guess the first things I wanted to do, first I just want to thank the organizers for today's conversation, Fossil Free California, 350.org. Certainly would love to thank the last panel that was up and the great insights we heard. And I want to thank our friends at ICLEI, that's Eunice and Angie and certainly Kel Roberts. I want to talk a little bit about this great case study that we just released on New York City's decision to divest earlier this year. So I'll remember to keep the microphone in front of my face this time. In January, New York City made big news by announcing our commitment to divest from fossil fuel reserve owners. We hold pension funds in New York City to the tune of about $190 billion, so we're no small player in the markets. And lo and behold, we had done some analysis over the last several years to really understand our climate exposure in our pension funds. And we ultimately determined that we had about 3% of our funds held in fossil fuel reserve owners. And we had presented the evidence to the mayor about their performance in the past and their outlook in the future, and it was a very clear decision with our trustees, with Scott Stringer, our controller, with the labor leaders, that it was the right moment, it was the right thing to do to divest our pensions. And we set that commitment that we're going to be divesting from those pensions within the next 5 years. We're on the path, we've set the commitment, and we're going to get that done. So it was a big moment for New York City. And I always like to tell people, I'm sure in this room this doesn't need to be said, divestment is an incredibly important step. It's an incredibly important message to send. It's not the only thing that's going to solve our climate crisis. We need to use that moment to leverage other moments as well and make sure that we are continuing to invest in climate solutions, that we are driving down our own greenhouse gas emissions as a city. Since 2005, our greenhouse gas emissions are down 15%, a good step. We have a lot more to go to really hit our targets. And we've also seen firsthand the impacts of climate change in New York City. Hurricane Sandy was the most vivid and real-life example of that. And 44 lives were lost, $19 billion in damages and lost economic activity. It was the worst natural disaster we've ever faced in New York City. And it was very clear to us that climate change had only made that storm worse, that we're going to see a continuing higher incidence and higher frequency events, storms, flooding, heat, all across New York City. And we needed to align our investments and continue to invest to reduce that risk, to drive down the causes of climate change, our own greenhouse gas emissions in New York City, and at the same time send a clear signal of climate accountability into the marketplace. We're suing big oil. We've taken to court Exxon, Chevron, Conoco, Shell. There's one more that I should remember and I'm not remembering right now. And we're currently working through the courts on that. At the same time, we're divesting and we're looking at our options for deeper investments. So earlier today, with ICLEI, we released this case study on our decision to divest. And I think there are copies here. I would love everyone to walk out of here and take a read. I think it's a really important read on the steps that were important to us. And I'm just going to highlight, I think, 3 or 4 really important lessons that came out of our decision to divest. The first, and you're going to hear a little bit more about this topic on the panel, we did our homework. We actually understood what our exposure was to climate risks on our portfolio, what was going to happen to our portfolio, what it meant for our pensioners. Pardon me. 2, it takes leadership. So we had to do our homework. 2, it takes leadership. It took the trustees of our pensions to understand the information and to step up and say, here's what we're going to get done. Set the commitment, set the targets that we're going to divest, and then work through the process to achieve it. And then the third really big lesson is that, particularly on an issue like divestment, the grassroots are so powerful. They put wind in your sails and help you achieve more than you think you can achieve. Work with the grassroots in order to help actually achieve the outcomes, get to those decision points, and be able to deliver on a divestment commitment like we're doing right now. So, again, pick up a copy of the case study. It's a really important just description of how we got to this place and where we're going to the future and what it means for New York City's climate action plan in its totality. So it's a lot about New York City. I'm going to stop talking about New York City, and I'm going to introduce our great panelists to really figure out this conversation, because the title of this, really the fiduciary duty and the changing definition in a realm of climate change, what that means for our pensions, what that means for divestment and investment in solutions. We're going to hear a lot of great things. We've got great folks on the panel here today. I'm going to let them introduce themselves, but sequentially, I'm going to start. So a quick introduction, Lisa Ann Hamilton with the Center for International Environmental Law. To my left, to her left is California Senator Ben Allen from Southern California, probably a popular face in the crowd today, and Casey Harrell with the Sunrise Movement to talk about related and very complementary efforts that are being undertaken with the insurance industry and divestment. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Lisa to talk for a few minutes about who she is, what she's been working on, and particularly her expertise on fiduciary duty. So, Lisa.
Thank you. Thank you so much for this introduction. And thank you so much to Janet and Fossil Free California. As a member of Center for International Environmental Law, we love you, and we are always happy to help you, and you're such a hero in getting on the phone saying, you guys, this bill, and we get busy. And so it's been such a pleasure to know you and meet you, and it's an honor to be here. The Center for International Environmental Law, since 1989, we use the power of law to promote human rights and protect the environment. And we see this, how we can best communicate the seriousness of climate change, its impact on the environment, its impact on human rights, and by really looking at the law. So I'm going to tell a little bit of a story in the framing Dan just gave in terms of this need for homework, this need for leadership, and this need for grassroots, which I'm going to call the nudge factor, which is all of you. So I'm going to put you back about 10 years ago, and I'm going to play devil's advocate here. So obviously I'm here because I care about climate, so take what I say as if I'm somebody who doesn't. So if you are a fiduciary 10 years ago, and you're listening to somebody like me say, hey, pay attention to climate, they're looking at you like this is a non-economic factor. This is a moral issue. And for us, we're saying moral issue means I don't want to profit from somebody's suffering. I do not want my money tied up in that. We've had great speakers talking about being aligned, having your money aligned with your values. And so these fiduciaries were very pinched because to them, if you're not earning profits, you're not serving the best interests of your plan participants, and you are violating your fiduciary duty. Because to them, climate seemed too remote. This was something people were going to have to worry about. The science, of course, we kept hearing about the science is too vague. So to them, it was a non-economic issue. And gradually with time, this sort of moral issue started to show increased incidence that there are real financial factors, that it does impact cash flow, it does impact returns on investment, it does impact dividends. It's not so remote. And so really starting to not only, yes, that moral imperative has not changed, but the facts started to demonstrate that if you are a business who is exposed to carbon-intensive activities, and there are now mandates, which there weren't 10 years ago, let's say we're going to reduce carbon emissions. There are now regulatory schemes that will dictate what our markets look like. It's just a fundamental financial issue. And again, if you do not care about climate, and sadly those people are not here, they are not moved when we say we need to act on climate, we don't have much time. They're moved by money. And now the money has finally caught up with the rest of the story. And so what's happening now is it's time for them to do the homework. It's time for them to say, look, you probably didn't monitor this investment fund like you did 10 years ago. It's time to look at what does the future market for, let's say, combustion engines look like. Volvo is in 2019 is going to be the first automobile maker, no more exclusive combustion engines. Everything will be either hybrid or exclusively electric. They're making the combustion engine market disappear. That is a real material financial risk depending on what your exposure is. And so the leadership, New York City, phenomenal. They get it. They get it. Sadly, Sandy, and I was living in New York for Sandy, which was, we take so much for granted how stable our lives are in the United States in so many ways. And being a part of that experience and seeing 14th Street down, completely out, no electricity, people in hospitals having to be hand carried down flights of steps in the dead of night with no power. I mean, it was extraordinary. Those are the things that we take for granted. And so to take the leadership and say, climate change is real, it's happening now, it is going to have a material financial impact on every sector of the economy. CL did some work in 2016 called the $1 trillion transformation with Mercer Investments that really captured this. And fiduciaries need to be encouraged, which is where the grassroots comes in now, to say, if you have, and this is U.S. Supreme Court decision, this is not advocates' passion, this is U.S. Supreme Court decision that says, you as a fiduciary have a duty to monitor your assets, you have a duty to do your due diligence, not at the point just of investment selection, but as part of an ongoing basis. And so when we now have, with each passing day, more and more information to show that there are material financial risks related to climate change, it's time to get those fiduciaries to start monitoring those investment portfolios. And what they're likely to find is they're not performing. Oil and gas is not performing the way it used to. And so there is now, again, a legal impetus as well as a material financial reason that can accompany the moral arguments that we used as activists. And so the nudge factor will be all of us. I think the last panelists talk about write letters to your trustees. If you have a pension, if you have family that has a pension, help them. I think the CL site for all of this will be up in the near future. We apologize for the delay. But we do, there is a way in which starting the engagement and putting that pressure on and really saying it's time to do the work. There's a legal basis, there's a material financial risk, and there's this moral risk that we care very deeply about. So I'll stop there.